My name is Vince Davis. I'm the tech service rep. I'll do most of the talking, but I'm the technical service representative for BASF. I cover all of Wisconsin and northern Illinois to Bloomington, essentially. So I put on a lot of miles. Previously, I was faculty at the University of Wisconsin. I was a weed science extension specialist for about 4 years, and previous to that, I was faculty at University of Illinois.
So are you a Badger fan or a Illini fan? Where is it?
Neither.
Okay. Where's home?
I got two degrees from Purdue, so I spent most years at Purdue and worked full time there. So
you are confused, aren't you?
we'll stop. I've had a long Big Ten tour.
All right.
So it can be totally informal. I don't know if any of you have ever seen me present before, but I would much rather have you guys stop me and let me address your questions or make sure we explain something better. I am very go with the flow. I kind of have a demonstration type materials up here. I've done this many times. I'm doing kind of an abbreviated set this morning, so I'm not going to do anything with any kind of live pesticides up here. So I'm not going to glove up or anything, but I don't have any live products that I'm going to mess with today. Sometimes I do that, but not today. So by all means, stop me, ask questions. They threw a lot of topics, I guess, for me to cover: new BASF products and tank clean out and mixing and formulation and nozzles and tips and all that sort of stuff. I'm probably going to hone that in and talk mostly about formulations and mixing in proper order, and I'll hit on a couple of those other topics along the way, but I'm probably not going to get too deep in some of those other things. But again, by all means, ask me questions. As far as new products, one of the things that's been a big initiative for BASF is in a program called On Target Application Academy training, which goes into all of those parameters as far as stewardship of keeping products on target. Now, most of you probably heard of dicamba tolerant beans that are coming along, or extend beans from Monsanto. That's certainly driving a lot of the efforts in wanting to make sure we increase stewardship and keeping products on target. But reality of the matter is we always have to keep products on target. So I usually start out and ask, when is it not our goal to keep pesticides on target and where they're supposed to be? Never, because it doesn't make sense for anybody. It doesn't make sense from stewardship, from getting those products off target, making your neighbors mad, whether it's a farmer or a homeowner, and it doesn't make sense financially, because you've spent money on those products. You want them in the site that you bought them for and working in the site that you bought them for. From that standpoint, we do have Ingenia will be a dicamba product. I'll mention it a little bit, and again when we talk about formulations. But Ingenia will be the newest dicamba formulation for the dicamba tolerant soybeans when that technology does come on the market. So that's driving a lot of it. But even beyond that, you guys are likely using more and more diverse herbicides in your systems today because of herbicide resistance. Is that true? No? Everybody in here, you guys all just same system you have been? Up here in Wisconsin, this is kind of a national survey of growers that are reporting glyphosate resistant. That was done just a couple years ago. Wisconsin, you'll see, was at only 11.5% when this was taken in 2015. You'll see a lot of the counties, or a lot of the states, down to the south, upwards of 90% report glyphosate resistance. So we are up here in the north, we are a little bit slower on that development of resistance, but I can tell you, even in this area, we have glyphosate resistant water hemp that has increased in Eau Claire County, Pierce County. Giant ragweed is starting to increase across the state. Palmer has been confirmed glyphosate resistant in a couple counties down south in Wisconsin. So those diversity of resistant weeds are increasing. And as a weed scientist, I've talked about herbicide resistance, and the number one message all the time is to increase your diversity from a sites of action standpoint, both in rotation and in tank mixtures. And a lot of management here, we no longer have that easy button of Roundup. We got to bring more formulations back into the fold. A lot of herbicides, a lot of formulations maybe some people haven't even used in 15 or 20 years. And you know, there's people out there that have spent a 10, 12-year career in a sprayer and have never sprayed anything other than glyphosate. I've talked to some of those people. So we're digging deep on the diversity of some of these products, and so it goes way beyond new products that are coming down the pipeline. It goes into, we're using more products back in our sprayers today, and we got to know how those products interact, how to get them mixed right, so they both work and you don't screw your sprayer up. Okay. Again, I talked about resistant weeds increasing. You know, here in Wisconsin, again, we have water hemp, we have Palmer amaranth, we have glyphosate-resistant mare's tail, giant ragweed. They are increasing, okay, and it will continue to increase. All right. I'm not going to get into the timeline. Again, growth regulators is going to be a big part of managing a lot of these weeds. In fact, the last week I have walked a whole bunch of fields for giant ragweed escapes that's come on through a lot of pre-emergence products. Our products, other companies' products, giant ragweed is just having a very, well, giant ragweed's having a good year. The people trying to control giant ragweed is not having a good year, okay, so far this year. And I don't know how much our mild winter has to play into that as far as breaking extra dormancy in giant ragweed this spring, and in some places some dry conditions that didn't get some pre-herbicides activated, but it's really blowing through. So having growth regulator technology is going to be good to manage some of those problematic weeds, if you will, when we get that. And obviously on the corn side, we have products like Status out there that works real well, and we're going to hopefully get that dicamba in the soybean side as well, as I talked about. Now, management is interesting. I mean, in 2014 alone, we had over 14 million acres of Status or dicamba sprayed in the U.S. Okay, so people say, well, we can't, you know, manage from an off-target standpoint and a sprayer clean-out standpoint. We can't manage all this dicamba coming into soybean systems, but we're doing it on 14 million acres now, and that's under the stewardship requirements that are in place now. Okay. So unfortunately, I think sometimes we've been doing ourselves a disservice because we've been talking about all of the increased stewardship that's going to come with the new technology, but reality of the matter is it's only going to make us better from where we're currently at. We shouldn't be going backwards in any way, shape, or form. Okay, so it is important, but we're only going to go better. One aspect of the stewardship and the reason we have new formulations, the Ingenia formulation is actually a new formulation, what's called a BATMA. It's a longer molecule, it's a heavier molecule, and so it has a lot lower volatility. And when BASF went to Clarity from Banville, it dropped the volatility by 70%. This BATMA molecule drops the volatility by another 70% over the Clarity issue. So what that means is the volatility, as in what I mean by volatility, is when you spray that compound and then it later volatilizes or turns into a gas form and then blows off target, that part of it really is not our main concern as long as we're using the correct formulations. The part that's the concern is particle drift movement during the spray application, okay? And there's always been, not saying the older formulations don't volatilize and move off target, but lots of the volatility issues get blamed unfairly on volatility when it's particle drift, because people say, well, it got up and moved 10 days later or 14 days later because that's when they observe the damage. But reality of the matter is it moved off target during the application, but you don't see the damage for 10 or 14 days because of the way the molecule works as far as accumulating and being translocated in the plant to the newer growth tissue. Okay, so it's also kind of understanding how these herbicides work is important to assess these things. BASF has a strong commitment and stewardship of the new products as well as our current products. We've been the leaders for our current status herbicide on the market of providing nozzles, having a nozzle program and education there to make sure growers and applicators are set up appropriately with the correct nozzles and droplet sizes to keep those products stewarded and on target. So I'm not even going to get too much more into that. That's all I wanted to do as far as products related, was just give you kind of a little bit of an update that technology is coming. But what I want to spend most of my time today on is formulations and mixing. Do a quick shift change here if my computer thinks. Okay, because as I said, it's important no matter what products you're spraying, and you're using more and more diverse products. How many of you have made a mixing error and made a mess in a sprayer before? Okay, so if you haven't raised your hands, look around at the guys that have raised their hands, because they're the ones that probably know how to do this right now. Because once you've screwed up once, you don't want to do it again, do you? No. And part of, one of the things I could do is talk about sprayer cleanout, but in my opinion, the most important component of sprayer cleanout is to get it mixed right in the beginning, okay? So when it comes to stewardship of off-target movement, I always say the most important thing to keeping your product on target on the sprayer, the most important thing, does anybody know? The most important thing on the sprayer to make sure you don't have off-target movement of a spray application. Pressure, nozzle, operator. That's right, the loose nut behind the wheel. That's the most important thing on the sprayer, okay? Most important thing to keep your sprayer clean, the guy standing in front of the inductor, without a doubt, okay? Because everything downhill from that starts with putting it in the inductor. And this is just an example of mixing things out of order right here. And once you get it out of order, you get this crusty sludge that can be a pain to deal with. This can also build up over time, and I'm going to talk about why that is as we go forward here, okay? So everything you need to know about sprayer cleanout comes in getting it mixed right in the beginning. So before I go too far, everybody should have, not to overlook this, but everyone hopefully got these set of handouts. I don't know if all John Deere people did or not, but a few things we brought here. And again, I have a sprayer cleanout presentation. I may get to it if we have time, but you should have a publication here that Purdue put together. Not to show my allegiance to Purdue, but this is a pretty good publication, I think. So you can take that home. We have a products quick reference guide. If you care to look at that, I'm not going to spend any more time on products or current products. And then probably the most important thing as far as formulations and mixing, I have put down on this handout here, and you guys have probably seen a lot of this before, right? You have kind of the Wales or the Dales formula. How many of you have seen this formula before? Like the Wales or Dales? Yeah, no? You guys are all sleeping? Should have brought sugary donuts.
I'm from the days when you mixed atrazine with water and kale.
Okay, with your hand?
I'm sure that's why they're white, but they are. They're good methodologies are flushed. Dad was dad.
So
I haven't sprayed anything.
everything, in a lot of sense, everything you need to know is in the Dales formula. And I always say that, I start that out, I'll be like, well, everything you need to know is right here, for the most part, which isn't totally true, but this is like the key. You have to follow this, and most any time I troubleshoot problems, it's because they've gotten something out of order, or they're not doing something right, or they're not tweaking something there. So this is the most important thing. And so, but what I'm going to do today, and surely you guys have all seen this before, but what I'm going to do today, or attempt to do today, is explain why some of this is. Okay, why are the formulations different? Why do we have all this different stuff? And why does it matter? And if you flip it over, I've got things on here like Dawn. I talk about Dawn and compatibility agents and how do they work and why. Is it just magic foo-foo stuff? So we're going to get into that just a little bit. So starting out, why do we even have different formulations? That's a good place to start. What is a formulation? A formulation is just a different way of packaging up an active ingredient, correct? But why have different formulations? It's okay to interact. Why do we have different formulations? Why not just have all the same formulation? Different chemicals, different weeds. Efficacy has a little bit to do with it, but different chemicals. Every formulation has its advantages and disadvantages. Okay? And why we have different formulations is for different uses. Now, overall, there's like probably 200 types of formulations out there, right? I mean, you got ready-to-use formulations, you got bait formulations if you were trying to control mouse or mice or something like that. All kinds of different formulations. In agriculture, we work with a fairly narrow set of formulations. Within those formulations, there has been advancement over time, but the reason we have different formulations is because most of the active ingredients all start out as some kind of crystal powder. Okay? There's some kind of solid that it starts from. All right? Now, the most important thing always over and over again is we say read the label. Read and follow label directions. Okay? There's also something out there called the safety data sheet, or the MSDS. It used to be MSDS, now it's SDS safety data sheet. If you get those safety data sheets, which a lot of people don't bother to take time to pull, but sometimes you can learn a lot about a product from the safety data sheet, like what the formulation is, what it's going to be corrosive to, how it is you should store it, okay? What kind of pumps is it going to be hard on, or rubber seals? Is it caustic to metals, or is it caustic to rubbers? Okay, you can learn all that from that safety data sheet, as well as a lot of the safety hazard type stuff, storage temperatures and everything. You also learn the physical properties from chemistry, like what is the boiling point, what is the substance that it starts from, and you'll read a lot of them and you'll find out that the active ingredient is some kind of crystal powder. Okay? So it starts, you got to think about chemistry here, and you have an active ingredient that's in a powder. Okay? You have a plant. I'm going to talk about plants or herbicides today. You have a plant. Okay? You got to get that active ingredient to the site of action in the plant. Now you're starting with a solid, and you got to get it in the plant, so it's got to cross the cuticle, it's got to travel to where it's going to be active in the plant. How are you going to get that done? When you stop and think about it, it's actually pretty amazing that we can get any of it done, because it's actually quite interesting, right? And what makes it hard is chemistry is pretty straightforward. It really is. We can do all kinds of measurements about the physical and chemical properties of a substance. Is pretty straightforward. But then we're putting it in a biological system and trying to control a biological organism with that chemistry. And so then you got this whole world of biochemistry as the intermediate interactions. All right? So we got to do all kinds of different things to get that chemical to move. So we're starting out with a solid. Now it's easier to handle a liquid, but if you go back to the days of atrazine, right? We started out with a lot of wettable powders. So our first formulations were a lot of wettable powders. Now, what's not good about wettable powders? Trying to get them to break down to liquid, because what don't they do? They don't dissolve well, right? They do not dissolve well. I got an example of a wettable powder right here. Okay? It does not dissolve when you put it in something. It does not dissolve. All you're hoping to do is get it to disperse evenly, right? But now if I strained this in a coffee filter, I'd get all those particles, I'd catch them in the coffee filter because it's solids. It did not dissolve. Does that make sense? Okay. Now there is no components to this wettable powder that makes it want to get away from each other or stay suspended. So if you give this a little bit of time, it's going to settle out. If I just tip it over, you can see the solids on the jar, right? Because they didn't dissolve. All right. Now, something different to that is we can have a soluble powder. All right? A soluble powder. So here's a soluble powder. We put it in something. Like a dry granular. And we form a solution. Okay? Because it dissolves. Okay? Now, if we could have every formulation, if every formulation could be a solution, life would be great. Okay? Life would be great. If every formulation could be a solution, life would be great. Okay? Here's an example of a solution. Okay? That's a liquid solution. All right? We have herbicides that are liquid solutions. Now, if we put a liquid solution in here, the beauty of a solution is as soon as you put it in there, it instantly mixes on its own, right? The more I put in, the more concentrate it's going to be throughout. No agitation, no settling out. All right? We can run this through a filter or a coffee filter and should pick up almost no residue whatsoever. All right? Because the solids are completely dissolved. All right? So if we could always have a solution, life would be good. Cap these up before I spill and make a mess. All right? Now, here's the issue. Here's the most important thing you learn in chemistry. Like dissolves like. Right? Anyone hear that? Anyone know what I'm talking about? Like dissolves like. It's one of the most important things. So you have oil components or petroleum-based components, and you have water. Oil and water don't mix, right? Everything relates back to oil and water, but they don't mix. All right? So some solids will dissolve in a petroleum-based liquid, and some solids will dissolve in an aqueous-based solution, right? What are good examples of that? Nobody's disliked their neighbor enough to put sugar in their gas tank, right? Sugar dissolves in water, will not be gasoline, right? Basic example. Okay, if you spill oil on your shop floor, are you going to wash it up, clean it up with a hose? Probably not. Probably going to have to clean it up with a stronger solvent of a petroleum base, like mineral spirits or something, right? So like dissolves like. So now let's go back to this solid pesticide we have. All right? Wrap your mind back around there. Now that solid crystal, if you can get it dissolved in an aqueous solution and form a solution, life is good. But you may not be able to do that. You may only be able to get it dissolved and turn it into a liquid in a petroleum-based solution. Okay? So that's why now we have water-based herbicides and we have petroleum distillate-based herbicides or emulsifiable concentrate herbicides. Okay? So now we have oils and waters. So everything we have to do in mixing products, we're always mixing oils and waters most of the time. All right? And when we talk about the easy button with glyphosate, some examples of things that are true solutions, like Roundup. Roundup Power Max is a solution. One of the reasons it's easy to work with. I mean, there's lots of things that made Roundup really popular from its efficacy standpoint and everything else, but you know, just everything about this product is what made it really the best product, you know, that we're just never going to get again, from human safety and off-target safety and handling, you know, the fact that it's a solution. There's just so many good things about this product that made it easy. And we go back to other things, it's not as easy, okay? But we have others. Clarity is a solution. Our new Ingenia will be a solution. Pursuit, Extreme. There are definitely solution products out there, and those are easy to deal with, all right? But unfortunately, a lot of the other things we have to deal with are solids, and we got to get them suspended, and we got to get them through your sprayer, okay? So where we have solids, we got to get through the sprayer is where it gets a little bit more tricky. They don't dissolve. So let's get into this a little bit, and then we're gonna rip through some of these formulations and the goods and the bads about them a little bit, but we're also going to start here, and that's about additives. All right. Now additives gets really tricky as well, because the reason we use additives are to increase the performance of what we're trying to do, particularly when we talk about post-emergence applications on the weed. Okay, because wrap back around, I said, we got to somehow get a solid, you know, crystal or an active ingredient in that plant and translocated to the site of action in some cases. And so how can additives do that? So additives come in several different forms: surfactants, oils, fertilizers, or utility adjuvants. And by utility adjuvants, I'm talking like drift control agents, maybe foaming. There's other type of agents out there that may be utility adjuvants, okay? But most of the time we're talking about surfactants and oils. And what's the purpose of surfactants and oils and fertilizers, all right? And we have, for the most part, there's standard rates there, you know, and you know, sometimes people it gets confusing, you know, talk about, well, use an NIS or an HSOC or a COC, MSO, you know, what's the difference between all these? They all have a little bit different properties of what they do, all right, to increase performance. The biggest thing here that we talk about a lot are surfactants. The utility of a surfactant is to decrease surface tension of the water, all right? Now what you have to understand is, again, we've talked about this, water and oil don't mix. If you put oil in water, what's going to happen? It's going to float to the top, right? Now, if you look at this, lipophilic is fat-loving, okay? Lipos or lipids are fats, philic is loving, okay? So lipophilic is fat-loving, and it's kind of a stick here, and what this is representing is a surfactant. And then you got the hydrophilic, or the water-loving component, kind of this ball. All right? So if you look at this picture down here, if you have a surfactant or an emulsifying agent in there, and you can take this and get these sticks, if you will, kind of like a tinker toy thing, to stick to small pieces of fat and be surrounded by these sticks where the ball is out, then that fat molecule can now float in an aqueous solution and float freely. Okay? What is a good example of a fluid that you guys probably deal with every day that works off this principle right here? Any thoughts? Milk. Milk. If you want to describe it easily, milk. You got butter fats in milk. When you buy skim milk or 1% milk, what is it? It's mostly water with milk fats in it. And you don't want that to separate out, right? So they put emulsifiers in there, and those emulsifiers will help it keep itself suspended in a homogeneous solution. Okay? So milk is a good example of a homogeneous mixture, if you will, of both fats and oils. All right? Now, I said we deal with fats and oils. One reason we deal with fats and oils in this business is because we started out with that solid and we want to get it to a liquid, and it either will dissolve in a petroleum-based or water-based solution. But the other reason we deal with it, particularly from a post-emergence weed control standpoint, is because I said we got to get it to the active site, right? Which means it has to enter the plant and cross a waxy layer or an oil layer, and then get into an aqueous center to move. So we need it to have both oil and water properties to move through the plant to get to where we want it to go. All right? So we have to play on both the water and oil concentrations to get it to do what we want it to do. All right? In the plant with post-emergence. So it's like, well, why do we need these crop oils? Why do we need the surfactants? Well, because we may need to get one product to do something a little different than another product, okay, to get it to move inside the plant. All right? And again, I've already said this, but you guys work in a world of increasing complexity where we can start out with the simple chemistry of things, but then you're trying to control biological function, so you got to work in this area of biochemistry, and then you got to deal with Mother Nature or the environment, so now you got an ecological component to it, because if you're in drought situations, for instance, the cuticles of those weeds may be a lot different or a lot harder to get chemicals across than if they're under good conditions, which is just the weed component, because the other component is the crop side, and the crop tolerance to the products you use is going to change depending on the conditions that crop has grown under, okay? When we have really good growing conditions for crops, they tend to often be more susceptible to a little bit of burn and a little bit of injury from the herbicide, because the cuticles aren't as hard as we expect them to be, to defend themselves against that pesticide. So in those environments, we may see more crop response than we wanted to see, okay? So we work in an area here where it's like, well, we had too much, we seen crop response, we had too much oil in that mixture. Well, it may have been the same mixture you've used for 4 years in a row, but this is the year that you burnt the crop with it because the crop was in a different growing condition. So there's times of a moving target with a lot of this I'm talking about as well, all right? Now the surfactant, I said, reduces surface tension. So by reducing surface tension, it helps penetrate. This here was a picture of giant foxtail leaves. This is what I was just explaining. This is under a 3600 times microscope, and under drought versus normal conditions, you can see increased cuticles and wax on this leaf here, okay? So if you're gonna have that increased cuticle, you are gonna need a better spreading performance or reduced surface tension, okay? So all water has kind of surface tension on it, and by reducing that, it spreads out. Now sometimes you want to increase surface tension. When do you like to increase surface tension of water?
Drift control.
No. When you wax your brand new John Deere tractor, right? So that's what wax does on a tractor, or your Ferrari for the rich farmers, Corvettes collection, something like that, right? But rainwater hits it, gives it a substance to increase surface tension actually, because it increases surface tension, it beads up and runs off, right? So that's increased surface tension. Reduced surface tension is it hits a substance and it spreads out more, okay? And sometimes we say surfactants make water wetter, all right? How quick do they work and at what concentrations, all right? Let's always debate whether I want to do some of these demonstrations as I go, or you know what, I just diluted all my, oh no, I got water right here. So how quick do these work? I don't know if you guys can see this or not, or hop up here and stand around. This is a pretty simple demonstration we can do. Talk about Dawn dish soap. So Dawn dish soap acts as a surfactant. It also acts as a compatibility agent. Now there's There's real compatibility agents out there that you can use or specified by some certain products, but Dawn is full of emulsifiers. Okay, full of emulsifiers. And we're going to get back to that in a little bit. So, anybody ever plug a leaky radiator with pepper? A back air? Why does that work?
Pepper takes on the water and swells and creates a hardened surface. Through like small pools of crack.
Pepper swells?
That's the way I would go. I like the way you go.
Kind of close. Pepper, so all I put on here is water, drinking water, okay, and the pepper's actually floating. Okay, it's floating on the surface. It's floating on the surface the same way a water bug is able to land on the surface. And I know its real name isn't a water bug, but I'm drawing a blank right now. But you guys know what I'm talking about. That's how it lands on the surface, okay? Because water, H2O, is made up of that ball and sticks, okay? And so the reason you have surface tension is because they're arranged in all sorts of different ways and those sticks are hanging up. And so if you zoomed in under a microscope on the surface of that water, you would see that it's really rough. All right? And so the pepper actually has an electronic charge to it that will keep it up and repel those everywhere it has a charge sticking up on the surface. All right? So the pepper floats a little bit. Now, if we put a little bit of surfactant in that, and I said it's going to reduce the surface tension, right? So on the surface of the water, well, let's just see what happens. Can everyone see this a little bit? One little drop. I'm not going to stir it, anything. Yeah, come on up, take a look. I'll wait if you guys want to come up and see.
Is this a bar trick?
Huh?
You put pepper
It
in
might
beer,
be
it goes
tonight.
to the bottom.
Huh?
You put pepper in beer, it eventually goes to the bottom. It sits there making little bubbles floating up all.
Okay, so we're gonna put one little drop of Dawn. Okay, 2 drops because I spilled. And my point is sometimes we talk about using a little Dawn as a compatibility agent or a little compatibility agent or a little bit of surfactant. And you might say, well, does it really do that much? Does it really do anything? Okay. This is a good way to just be able to visualize that it doesn't take very much to make a major change. All right. While I have you guys up here, we'll do one. I'm going to jump ahead to the next demonstration. What the heck? I'm out of order, but that's okay. You guys are up out of your seats. Let's do this too. So the other component to surfactants, or the other component to Dawn, I said, is emulsifier. So it has a surfactant properties, and this demonstrates its surfactant properties. Okay? So a non-ionic surfactant would do the same sort of thing. Okay? The other thing Dawn has is emulsifiers in it. Okay? Now we use emulsifiers in a lot of stuff. Emulsifiers are in the milk. That's what keeps those fats suspended and pushing away from each other. Okay? So it's full of emulsifiers. Why is it full of emulsifiers? Well, if you cook your bacon in a pan in the morning, right? How long would you have to stand there and run it under water to get it clean? Just plain water. Water's not going to wash that oil off, right? You soak that thing in a sink full of Dawn, and what happens? It'll come off because it'll encapsulate that a little bit. Okay, so do an experiment here. Simply milk. We'll drop some food coloring. Has anyone ever seen this before? Okay, so we got milk and food coloring. This works better with whole milk, actually. But this is what I was able to steal from the Holiday Inn Express this morning. So all I have here is a Q-tip and Dawn that I squirted in there, okay? I'm going to get up here closer if you want to watch this, but you can see I put the food coloring in this milk. And what the food coloring is going to interact with is the water portion. All right? Going to interact with the water portion. And I usually do another water and oil trick. But as soon as I put the Dawn in here, and I'm not moving the Q-tip, I'm just holding this here. So what is occurring? I'm not moving the Q-tip. I just want to point that out. I'm holding it as still as I can hold it here.
But it's stirring itself.
Surface tension.
First it attracts the better known as agitation.
If you want to entertain a 3-year-old,
Or a whole bunch of adults.
or me,
I know what I'm doing with my kids tonight.
yeah, there you go. Do this with your kids. My point is this. I try to do these couple of these simple demonstrations to point out that we talk about chemical interactions and the importance of putting things in there to do stuff, and little bits of things can sometimes make a really big difference to the chemistry of that solution. Okay? What was going on here is I said this is clear full of emulsifiers, and they've done. I'm not a Dawn dish soap salesman, okay, but dish soap is clear full of emulsifiers, and the reason it's clear full of emulsifiers is because they formulated this to take fats off stuff. So it has strong emulsifiers, so it's interacting with these fats and flipping them things around and making more and more of these bubbles, okay? Now, that's an emulsion. Now, what can you have an invert emulsion in a product you guys use all the time? Give you an example of an invert emulsion. What do I mean by invert emulsion? So if I go back a couple slides, I showed you that those emulsifiers had the fat molecules covered so it can float in an aqueous solution, right? Okay. So an invert emulsion would be the opposite, where it covers an aqueous molecule in a fatty solution. That'd be mayonnaise. Okay? That'd be mayonnaise. Mayonnaise is basically an invert emulsion. Okay? You guys can make invert emulsions in your spray tanks. And you do not want to do that. Okay? Anyone ever hear about cottage cheese messes, slime messes, where you slime things up? Those are invert emulsions. That's what happens. How do you break an invert emulsion? Water and emulsifiers, water and Dawn. That's you can fix a lot of problems with water and Dawn. That's why I have it on there. Now it's better to not make them to begin with. All right. So let's talk about some of these formulations and maybe how not to make them. The other component, I won't spend too much time on this, or I have a little bit, but nitrogen in fertilizers as far as additives. Why do lots and lots of post-emergence herbicides require the addition of ammonium sulfate or urea ammonium nitrate? Because they want that nitrogen component in there. Anyone know why? It gets back to the idea that we're trying to get that molecule in the plant and translocate it in the plant. And so one way to do that is to stimulate the nitrogen pumps. Okay, plants have a lot of pumps on the cells to move nitrogen in and out. Okay, so we want to play on that nitrogen gradient, and the nitrogen stimulates weed growth as well as stimulates activity of these nitrogen pumps in and out of cells. Okay, and the more those nitrogen pumps open and close to move things in and out of cells, the more chance it has to drag the pesticide across the cell wall as well. Okay, So again, all of it's based on those functions. Now, we're going to jump back a little bit, but water is not all created equal. What do I mean by that? pH, hardness. What do you have to do? I mean, ammonium sulfate, by the way, is a dissolvable powder or dissolvable granule, okay? Ammonium sulfate dissolves in water to form a solution very easily. Sometimes I do a trick though to demonstrate that you can saturate the amount that you can actually dissolve in water. All right? The reason I do that demonstration is because water content, water quality is important, but also water quantity. Okay, now that may sound goofy, but water quantity is really important in these mixtures. Now, what type of environment would you be lacking water quantity? Get there yet. I'll get there eventually. But urea ammonium nitrate, you want to do weed and feed? When do you have the biggest problems with mixing issues in sprayers and making messes? Dry products, and you're trying to mix it with UAN lots of times, okay? And the reason we have problems with UAN as carriers in there is because UAN is lacking water, all right? There's not enough water in the UAN to do what we need it to do. That's when we really need to pre-slurry, okay? So water quality, how many of you know the quality of your water that you put through your sprayers? Huh? You've tested it? Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So,
How good is RO water right from the sprayer?
reverse osmosis water? It's yeah, it would change the properties of how much, say, ammonium sulfate you need to put in. So one of the things I talk a lot about is one of the things to understand about your water is how hard it is. We put ammonium sulfate in the water to do two things. One, increase the nitrogen content to stimulate the nitrogen pumps in the plant, but the other reason is to condition the water, okay? So there's certainly a lot of difference between water conditioning properties as well as the nitrogen component properties there. So if you're running reverse osmosis water, you shouldn't have hard properties to actually have to condition or condition there. So that all you would need really is the nitrogen component for some products, all right? So understand your water so you understand what additions you need to put in there.
I got one question. What about water temperature above ground tanks where they can warm up if it's well water? Is that important or what does that mean?
Yes, water temperature is also an important factor. And the reason that water temperature is important, or UAN temperature or anything else, is because like I've demonstrated here, there's always, and if you look, there's still reactions going on this. This plate is still moving. I'm not even touching it, but this plate is still moving. There's constant interaction, constant reactions going on even in a tank of water. Those molecules are bouncing around, okay, and they are constantly moving. And that's part of demonstrating this stuff. Okay, there's constant reactions going on. The warmer that water is, the faster those reactions are going. The colder the water is, the slower those reactions are going, right? You get the temperature down low enough and they start moving slow enough, what do? Well, you got ice, they freeze. But there's even reactions going on in ice, just very, very slowly, all right? So for a lot of things where we want things to mix well, we need the reactions going because we need water molecules to break themselves apart to attach to something else to get a homogeneous solution of something else in there. So the faster that's going, the faster you can make a homogeneous solution with other molecules in there. The slower that's going, the harder it's going to be. Does that make sense? So it's all about reaction speed of the liquid. The warmer, the quicker the reactions. Okay. Now we started out here, I said it's all about the Dale's formula, where you can put dry flowables in first. You got to agitate those or let them dissolve. A lot of dry flowables need time. They need to sit in water for time. It's not about agitation, it's about time. It needs to soak. Okay, and I'll talk about why when I talk about formulations. Agitate, then you're going to put liquids in like 4L or aqueous solutions, the SCs. Then emulsifiable concentrates will go in last. Okay? We'll get into the properties of each of these and why that is. We already talked about wettable powders and soluble powders in AMS. Let's talk about water dispersible granules. Okay? Now water dispersible granules, things like Zidua or Status, okay, now you got these granulars in a shape, right, versus wettable powders. Now, wettable powders, we said that was an older formulation. The things that were bad about it is they would cake up, they didn't flow well, dusty, so a lot of dust inhalation hazards, okay, they didn't mix well or dissolve well, and they were also low in active ingredient. Okay, they often tended to be low in active ingredient as far as percent, so you had to use a lot of it. All right, so a major upgrade is to go to water dispersible granules. Now, what water dispersible granules incorporates clay in. Clay has a lot of active sites to it to stick to active ingredients. So now we can have really high percentage active ingredient products, like 50 to 85% actives. But now you have clay particles in there. And there's a couple different ways they can make these clay things. They can extrude them like a noodle maker, okay? And you get these long, you get kind of, you know, long tubes like this. Status and Zidua are both long tubes. Or they may make them in a pan, what's called a pan granulator, and it's like making snowballs, and so you get round balls, like Hornet, for instance, or Python is round balls, okay? But it's got a clay material in there. Okay, so now you're putting clay in your machine or in your mix, clay particles. And the reason you need time to let these things dissolve is because clay does not absorb water as quick as other soil particles, right? If you got a field high in clay content and you get a rain, the percolation rate is going to be a lot slower than on sand, right? Okay, so that clay takes a while to kind of absorb, and they're packed real tight because they're packed under pressure. But the benefits is we get the active ingredient concentration up, and we get the dust levels down, we get the flowability is improved, you know, less caking, all of those sorts of things. Okay, so that was a benefit to these products. All right, it's dry. Huh?
What's a while? How much time?
About 10 to 15 minutes usually for most products. Some are harder than others. But the biggest problem I see is people like to dump these right into the sprayer without pre-slurring. My number one thing with solids is pre-slurry the stuff. I always say get a jug, you know, an empty 2.5 gallon surfactant jug. Measure out the dry product you need for the next load when you're mixing your current sprayer load. Put it in a jug, pre-slurry it 2 to 1, fill it with water, cap it off, leave it sit. 10 to 15 minutes, shake it up. 2 to 1, we usually say pre-slurry 2 to 1 is a standard ratio, so if you're working with a liquid, it'd be 2 gallons of water to 1 gallon of product, okay? But if you think about that in terms of weight, water's, you know, 8.5 pounds, so you still think about it 2 to 1 as far as weight as well. So you could put about 8 pounds of a dry product to about 2 gallons of water. Will give you about a 2 to 1 ratio. Does that make sense? Yep. And I think we put, I don't know, what do we have on here for dries? I put it on here. I say 2 parts water to 1 part product, 1 gallon of water for every 5 pounds. So basically what I just said. 8 to 10 pounds of dry product to 2 gallons of water in a 2.5 gallon jug. Let it sit 10, 15 minutes. It'll be, you know, light agitation, and it'll be ready to dump right in the sprayer for the next load. All right. We'll get into the next formulations like an SC or a liquid like atrazine 4L. Okay. These are liquid products, but they also have clay in them, clay carriers. And it's the clay carriers that's holding the active ingredient. Because again, the active ingredient in these is still solid because it will not dissolve in an aqueous solution. So the active ingredient is solid, but they're binding the active ingredient to clay particle, and then they're suspending it in a water and an aqueous solution. All right? So the beauty of these products, they dissolve right away in water. You know, that it's easier to dissolve because these are already pre-slurried. The downfall to them, they can still settle out over time, right? You leave Lumax or atrazine or any of these products sit in a jug long enough and you're going to have a hard layer at the bottom where the clays have settled, right? Same thing once you put it in a tank. After a while they can settle because you're trying to make a suspension, okay? And that's what SC stands for, suspension concentrate, okay? The active ingredient is concentrated, but they're trying to keep it suspended in a liquid.
How good a job
All right.
How good a job do they do when you buy these big totes and you take a little out here and a little out there?
Well,
Should you really be mixing them?
depends how long it sits and the conditions it sits and how well it stirs, but yeah, you know, agitation
How
or
do you stir it nowadays? The totes are non.
Totes are sealed lids now, and they don't want
Yeah.
you to crack them seal.
it's a good question.
The sparger tube,
Is that?
like a sparger tube, come down, put it on air, don't put a lot of air on it at first, because it'll blow it out.
How you gonna get
So how
the
you
air?
getting in
How
with
you gonna
that?
get the air in?
Through the top of the tote, right?
You can't
But
open
that's
it.
sealed. You don't want you cracking that seal to take them back.
Put it on the truck and take it on a railroad.
You got to use it fast.
Start and stop on it.
And it takes a while for them to settle out, right? It takes a while. I mean, they do a pretty good job, but over time it will happen.
What's a lot?
Huh?
2-3 days. I had the problem with harness extra, settling out in the sprayer over a 3-day period where it got rained out.
Oh, mixed up in the sprayer. Yeah, 2-3 days it'll settle out in the sprayer. Yeah, but I mean in the tote as a formulation, it shouldn't be settling out in 3 days. No,
Month?
no, months. Yeah, months.
So if you just,
Yeah.
I just take the forklift, kind of hit the brakes and take off, slap it around, and try to mix it up.
There's a lot of ways to do things. Well, but that's the properties of these formulations, and that's why, because there's still solid components that are suspended, okay? And the problem with these suspension concentrates, particularly if you don't get them mixed up right in order, this is what you get. Why? Because it's clays. And one of the things I say is, what else do we do with clays? Clays can get really hard. What do we do with clays? We do things like mount mortar bricks together, right? And fill drywall cracks and all kinds of stuff that we can utilize clays to get hard. Well, guess what? If we treat them wrong, they'll get hard inside your sprayer as well. And that's not what we want. And so this is why you don't do things out of order from that perspective. And it's also why they build up over time, okay? Now, capsulated products, I don't have Pral H2 on me, but there are microcapsulated products out there, CS products, and these are kind of interesting. Pral H2O is an example of a capsulated product, and that's interesting because the original formulation of Pral was an EC, so the crystal dissolves in a petroleum distillate, but to be able to handle that in a water solution, Pral H2O, water is in the name, what they do instead of using a chemical emulsifier is they actually physically covered every active ingredient ball with a polymer coating or a capsule coating. Okay, and that capsule can then float in water. All right, some other examples of a polymer coating is like Warrant from Monsanto, or Command 3ME, when they went from Command 4EC, which is emulsifiable concentrate, to Command 3ME. ME stood for microencapsulated, okay? In the real world, if you spent 13 years in college like me, you know the difference between ibuprofen and Advil. Okay, it's the same encapsulation stuff. And what that encapsulation does, some of the things it does is it changes the time at which those capsules will break down in the environment. All right, and so that's how the reason they encapsulated Warrant is because it makes then the acetochlor safe to soybeans because of the time release. All right, it's how Monsanto went from Harness Extra to Degree Extra, and the reason they called it Degree Extra is because it has longer residual, because it takes more heat to break the capsules open before it releases the active ingredient in the environment. All right, so there's some benefits to that particular formulation. All right, and then you have the solutions, and I already said solutions are wonderful because you dump them in and poof, they instantly go from a solution, from one concentration to a solution of another concentration instantly, okay, which is easy. And then we have emulsifiable concentrates. Now, emulsifiable concentrates all share properties in that they're all of the things that come in dissolved in a petroleum distillate. Okay, so they're going to smell kind of like diesel fuel. So one of the bad things to this formulation is odor. People don't like it. All right. One of the good things of this formulation is it actually mixes very well, and once it mixes, it instantly becomes suspended because of the emulsifiers in the product. So when you dump this that looks like a diesel fuel petroleum distillate in water, it makes a plume and turns white instantly, right? And that's because those emulsifiers instantly coat, when it gets in water, the emulsifiers that are put in here instantly coats the petroleum molecule, and the emulsifiers flip in water and allows it to suspend in water. The problem is you need enough water for that to fully occur. If you put this in an environment where it does not have quite enough water, and the emulsifiers try to work, but it's swamped by its own petroleum distillates to a small amount of water, what do you get? We've covered this already. An invert emulsion, which is the slime or the cottage cheese that you get, an invert emulsion, okay? Number one rule of thumb is to pre-slurry these products. Put them just in water and allow them to, the emulsifiers to completely work before you put them in a tank that's lacking water, like a high level of UAN.
What was the example of that product?
Examples of emulsifiable concentrates, there's a lot of emulsifiable concentrates on the market. Outlook, Armazon Pro, Verdict, those are all our products. Prowl EC, but you know, everybody has emulsifiable concentrates. Surpass, Dual, Harness, not Harness Extra, but Harness. I could go on and on. Yeah, oh yeah, almost all the insecticides are ECs. Yeah, lots of ECs on them, lots of ECs, okay? And so you want them to go in last, but if you're going to put them in an environment that may not have a lot of water, like UAN or something, pre-slurry it 2-to-1. All right? So that's the most important component with emulsifiable concentrates. All right? So you don't end up with this. So the reason you end up with problems like this is because you didn't allow those emulsifiers to work appropriately in an emulsifiable concentrate herbicide. All right? So those are some reasons why the Dale's formula is the Dale's formula, because you need the dry flowables to go in first so you can get suspension of those particles without changing the properties of the water, because actually, because they are suspended, they are just going to be in the water environment, but not changing the properties of the water. Okay? When you put emulsifiable concentrates in there, you now have emulsifiers in there that is actually changing the actions and the surface tension of the water. All right. Compatibility agents, there is no replacement for doing jar testing. Anytime someone asks me about particularly micronutrients or UAN, one that can give us a lot of problems in the spring is ATS. It can be done. It can be done. There's not a reason it can't be done, but you got to try every formulation out. And I say over and over and over again, having a jar that looks like this is way better than having your sprayer look like this. Okay? You can get everything you need to do a jar test at Fleet Farm or Farm Fleet or whatever you have up here, Rule King, whatever they are. And there's no substitute for doing a jar test if it's a combination that you were unfamiliar with. All right? And so oftentimes I do these in the right order and the wrong order, and I show you how you can actually mess them up. So the reason that I've been talked about the UAN so much is because of water environment. I'll talk about that again, as well as oil. So one of the other worst things you can do standing in front of the inductor is to put all the products in the inductor. Okay? So what happens? That was the other demonstration I should have done. I didn't grab the stuff to do it. What happens if you put, say, a WDG directly in an emulsifiable concentrate compound in your inductor? What's gonna happen? You coat the dry particles with oil. Okay? You coat them with oil. How quickly will they dissolve in water if they get coated in oil first? They won't, right? It goes back to my question, how long you got to stand in front of the sink with the water running to rinse the bacon grease off the pan without any assistance? A long time. And I've had people, they just dump stuff in the inductor and say, well, I agitate, I have extra agitation, or I have strong agitation. I don't care. No. It's going to take a lot of agitation, almost take sheer force of all the hard granules to go through your pump to have almost a physical force to get it to break the surface once the surface is completely coated in oil before you put it in that water. Okay? And you can here's a quick demonstration you can do at home for those of you that want to go home and entertain your 3-year-olds or third graders, or even your high schoolers for that matter. But simply take the food coloring again, oil and water, and put oil in one of the jars of water and let it float to the top. Just cooking oil, okay? Take the food coloring, a couple drops of food coloring in the water, it'll instantly turn the water that color, okay? Then you put the oil in that water with food coloring. Oil will rise to the top. You will have a perfect separation of colored water and oil. And put food coloring on top of the cooking oil in the other jar. Just drop it on. Load it up. Cap it and shake it. Tell me if you will ever get a separation. I let you shake for an hour. You will not get a separation. You will have food coloring trapped in oil. And that's what you would do to your active ingredients if you put them in out of order. If you allow those dries to come in contact with oils before they go in contact with waters. You're wasting that product because you're not going to get it dissolved in your water solution. Okay. More importantly, well, I don't know if it's more importantly or not, but the other downfall is it's probably going to hang up somewhere in your sprayer. Okay. That's what's going to fill your end caps. That's what's going to settle out in your hoses. That's what's going to line your walls with that clay coating. Okay? So getting the mixture correct up front will do so much for keeping your sprayer clean. It's as far as getting them in a good homogeneous solution will make all the difference in the world for keeping your sprayer clean in the long run. Okay? We have a lot of people that run run UAN plus water plus Verdict plus atrazine, you know, a lot of these combinations. We have a lot of retailers now, even though they mix it in the right order, they do 2 squirts of Dawn at the beginning to just change it, and it just keeps the sprayer clean, you know, believe it or not. So, and basically are using it as a compatibility agent, although there are other compatibility agents on the market, all right? Here's what I was getting to. UAN is lacking water. I didn't do my demonstration today to show you, to demonstrate water competition for solution products or dissolvable products. But basically UAN, or 28%, is 30% water, and 32% is only 20% water, okay? This is where people get in trouble with emulsifiable concentrates herbicides, dumping them in a UAN solution without pre-slurrying them first. All you have to do is pre-slurry them first, 2-to-1 ratio, allow those emulsifiers to work, very little agitation, dump it in, and you'll have a homogeneous solution inside that 20% water. Okay? You put it directly in there, those compounds have to compete now with the nitrogen and the solids and the non-water component to that to get to the water, and it has to find a pocket of enough water concentration for the emulsifier to work before it can go into a homogeneous solution. Okay? And the more stuff you've already put in that tank, like atrazine or other things, that's floating around in that water, the harder that is going to be for the emulsifiable concentrate herbicide, and that's when you make cottage cheese and sludge and slime and snot and everything else I've heard it called over the years. All right? So I may sound like I'm repeating myself over and over again, but pre-slurry, jar test, it's all the simple things over and over, and these are the reasons why, because you don't want a tank that looks like this or screens that look like this. Now the other component to sprayer clean out, and I'm not gonna get to the sprayer clean out conversation, but I'm gonna hit on a couple really important points. And these guys probably did want me to get to the sprayer clean out because I got pictures of John Deere sprayers all the way through that one. But the other most important critical point to sprayer clean out, in my opinion, is proper sprayer setup. Okay? It's proper mixing up front, but it's proper sprayer setup. It's having a proper screens all the way through. All right? So you're not stopping something up with the wrong kind of screen at some point in time. There are screen specifications on some products, like atrazine. How many of you spray atrazine? All of you. What size screen? 50 mesh. Says right on the label, doesn't it? Any atrazine component says 50 mesh screen right on the label. All right. So if you're running an 80 in there, or a 120 for some reason in some spots, and you have, you know, any kind of difficulty, or you're going to run through there enough time, you're probably going to start to pick up more solids than you want and mess up your flow and mess up your rate. Okay? So sprayer setup, appropriate screens all the way throughout, very critical. Because a lot of the compounds that we deal with are clay, solid substances. Routine cleaning is also very important, you know, with a good detergent-based cleaner. I know John Deere has their own, you know, branded cleaner. There's a lot of different detergent cleaners on the market. You know, use one. I don't particularly pick one out over another. I just grab this one as always kind of a reminder. This is a Precision Laboratories detergent-based cleaner. But use a detergent-based cleaner unless a label specifies otherwise. Now, some labels do specify maybe something a little bit different, whether it be ammonia or bleach or something like that. But generally, commercial detergent-based cleaners are your best all-around cleaner in most situations. Do it routinely, okay? How often should you clean a sprayer? This is always a very sensitive subject here, because if we go by the letter of the law, you should clean the sprayer at, you know, you should thoroughly clean the sprayer every time you switch components or at the end of every day. And I know applicators have run things for a long time going to look at me and they're going to have choice words about, yeah, cleaning at the end of every day, right? You know, I know guys that will run the same herbicide combination, be like, well, I'm running the same combination, so I don't need to clean, and they may try to go for, you know, a week or 2 weeks. Well, things are going to build up over time. And so what is the right answer? It probably depends on what you are spraying, okay? And one of the reasons you need to understand formulations, because if you're spraying a whole bunch of clay-based products in UAN, so you don't have a lot of water going through that spray system for extended amounts of time, you're probably going to be building up solids in areas of that sprayer, the end caps, the strainers, the, you know, any kind of dead end in there. You're going to be building that up over time, all right? And it's going to be a lot easier to get that out routinely when it's a little buildup than waiting till the end caps are completely plugged solid, all right? If you're running nothing but solutions, as in, you know, a week of spraying ammonium sulfate and glyphosate, and that's all you've been spraying, well, as long as you're given the time for ammonium sulfate to dissolve, and you're not using more ammonium sulfate than you need to condition the water and to get to dissolve, and again, I didn't do that little demonstration, and then you're putting glyphosate, I mean, you should be able to spray a long time. You should have nothing to get plugged up after, you know, you should be able to spray a lot longer. So what is the right answer of how often to spray? Well, it depends what you're spraying, okay? But think that through and understand what you're doing with your sprayer and what you're asking your sprayer to do. I think the biggest thing, the biggest thing here is, you know, my biggest keys to what I do here is that is to understand there is a real difference and a reason that we have different pesticide formulations. There is a real reason and a difference why we say to put them in the tank in an appropriate order, because it has to do with compatibility and competition for water and the ability to get those to dissolve into a homogeneous either suspension or solution in that tank, okay? And there is a real reason that compatibility agents, emulsifiers, and surfactants are required for some things, because they do change, in a lot of cases, significantly and quickly the properties of that water and how well that's going to work for you to maximize the effectiveness of your spray solution, as well as, again, keeping the sprayer, you know, clean by having things dissolved all the way and appropriately. Okay, so everything falls in line with getting those products mixed right to begin with, and there is a reason we really hammer home, you know, taking the time to pre-slurry. I try to tell guys when they're messing with dry products, they don't like it, you know, because what they like to do is just put the dry product in the inductor and run water in and be like, well, it's going to dissolve. Say, well, it's the same amount of work, particularly if you're going to do multiple loads. It's the same amount of work to put the dry that you're going to use for the next load in a container and let it soak in water while you're dealing with this load and spraying it. When you come back, you go to put that in, you're going to dump it in your inductor or in your tank, either one, and, you know, and go right on to mixing, because it's going to be broken up and ready, and you're not going to be standing there waiting for that to dissolve, and you can, you know, get that ready again. So in the long run, it's really the same amount of work and the same amount of time. It's just, you know, thinking ahead for some of those steps to make life easier. Okay, so.
What about like interlock? Where would you mix that in order?
Interlock usually goes in last, yeah. A lot of your adjuvants, your oil adjuvants, your interlock, all that's going to go in at the end. Water conditioners, ammonium sulfate is going to be at the beginning, and then all the other adjuvants are pretty much going to be at the end. Yep.
What if you're foliar feeding some micronutrients?
Foliar feeding micronutrients.
With the chemical?
Biggest thing is, you know, compatibility test there. Make sure you know everything's gonna work well. Usually, it does. There's usually not a lot of problems with compatibility, but it can happen. The biggest, the other thing to be cognizant of when it comes to formulations is to understand that emulsifiable concentrates are oil-based. And so the more emulsifiable concentrates you're putting in a load, the higher oil content or oil to water content you're putting in that load, okay? And some herbicides have, and insecticides have restrictions on a label. Like, do not mix this product with an emulsifiable concentrate, whatever. And it's because of the formulation, all right? Can heat that up because of the additional oil content. The reason I bring that up here is because when you're dealing with micronutrients, sometimes micronutrients can be on the edge of causing necrosis or leaf burn. And if you mix that with too many other things that are emulsifiable concentrates in that mix, if you're going out with a micronutrient and you're putting on an emulsifiable concentrate, let's say Select, for instance, to pick up volunteer corn, and then you're putting Warrior in there, or some other insecticide that's also an EC. So now you're stacking a bunch of ECs up in there with your micronutrient, and you're going out on flowering. I've seen some significant leaf burn and damage in some of those combinations because of oil content by micronutrient content. So just be aware of some of those interactions, I guess. Did I answer your question? Sure, you're kind of. Will direct me better.
Well,
As far as order, I guess, or when to put them in, or I'm not against them. I'm just saying every combination is different.
which chemicals do you put them with and which chemicals don't you put them with? Like, would you put a micro pack with a Cobra? He's going to give it a plant.
Probably not, because of the objective. So I'm usually not a big fan of mixing micronutrients with herbicides, because those should be going out at two different timings. Should be. Okay, you should be done spraying herbicides well before you're probably putting the micronutrients on. Now there might be a case, and that's why I said, that's why I was throwing like insecticides out there. Most micronutrients you're gonna probably mix more with fungicides or insecticides than you are herbicides, hopefully. But Cobra, I would say, I would almost never be trying to put micronutrients on with Cobra, because the activity of Cobra is you're going to burn everything and you're going to defoliate some, you're going to burn the soybean leaves. So if you're putting a micronutrient out there, you want the micronutrient to actually get in the plant and do something. You don't, putting that on at a time when you're burning the leaves and they're not going to be able to move that material doesn't really
How do you know which
make sense.
chemicals you put it with and which ones you shouldn't? As far as the plant take.
Like I said, fungicides and insecticides should have no effect on the plant. So you should have compatibility with micronutrients, with fungicides and insecticides as far as put on the plant. Some herbicides, like if it's like a grass herbicide, like a Select or something, that because you're trying to pick up volunteer corn, that might make some sense going on late. But anything that's going to be like a contact herbicide where you're going to get plant burn on those plants, like Cobra or Flex Star or something like that. First straight you shouldn't really get burn. First straight would probably be okay, but again, I would question the timing. You're either going to be way too early on the micronutrient, or you really missed the boat on control with first straight if you're mixing those products together. Should be okay, but timing would be, I'm not sure it makes much agronomic sense, I guess is what I'm saying. Well, that's yeah, I know. Doesn't mean you're supposed to. Like I said, I know I didn't cover sprayer clean out, ultra thoroughly, or maybe some other things I did, but I thought I would just, hit on some of the basics of formulation mixing and kind of get into the why we have this Dale's formula. Why do we say to do it this way? And what do some of these things do? So I'll stick around, you know, through the lunch or whatever, and if you guys have more questions or want to pin me down, be more than happy, so I'll stick around here for a little bit, and thanks.